3 years. That's how long Chloe and Grace hadn't spoken to a stranger. Two little girls in pale pink dresses, silent since the night they lost their father. Claire had stopped believing anything could reach them, until a quiet black army veteran and his German shepherd stepped into the park. One touch from the dog and a voice thought lost forever broke the silence. The park breathed in long, easy sighs that morning, the kind of breath only early autumn in Asheville could manage. Leaves along the ridge burned in russet and gold, their edges trembling under a crisp breeze that carried the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. The sun was still gentle, stretching pale light across the trimmed grass and winding gravel paths. Joggers traced their usual loops, couples sipped coffee from paper cups, and a group of children in bright jackets scrambled across the jungle gym, their laughter spilling into the air like coins dropped into a fountain. Claire Whitmore stepped onto the path leading into the heart of the park, her heels making barely a sound against the gravel. She wore a tailored camel coat that cut a clean line against her frame, but it was her eyes sharp gray, always observing that drew attention if anyone looked long enough. For years, she had navigated boardrooms and crisis meetings as the CEO of Whitmore Adaptive Technologies, but nothing in her corporate arsenal had prepared her for the private war she had been fighting at home. Flanking her on either side were Chloe and Grace, her 7-year-old twin daughters, identical in build but different in the subtle inflections of their presence. Both wore pale pink dresses beneath their small wool cardigans, white tights, and scuffed flats that hinted at a summer's worth of forgotten playground games. Chloe walked with a slight forward lean, scanning the park with curiosity, her pale blonde hair catching the sunlight like spun glass. Grace moved more cautiously, eyes lowered, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her cardigan. Since the night their father's car skidded off a rain-slicked mountain road 3 years ago, the girls had spoken only to Claire and each other, their voices vanishing like candles snuffed in a storm whenever strangers approached. Claire had learned to stop expecting breakthroughs. Therapists, specialists, endless lists of exercises, each ended the same way. Silence and the unspoken weight of memory hanging between them. The park was less a place of hope today and more a concession to routine. Saturdays were for fresh air, even if it meant watching her daughters drift along the periphery of other children's laughter. A few hundred yards away, Marcus Reed made his slow circuit along the outer path. At 38, his frame still carried the compact strength of his years as a U.S. Army medic, though the faint hitch in his gait spoke of a leg that had been rebuilt rather than healed. His skin was deep brown, the kind of tone that caught and held sunlight, and his closely cropped hair bore the first threads of gray at the temples. His eyes, a warm but guarded brown, scanned the park with the habit of someone who had learned on dusty roads far from here to read every angle for threat and every shadow for movement. Beside him trotted Valor, a black and tan German shepherd with a thick, healthy coat and the deliberate, alert bearing of a trained service dog. Valor's ears pivoted to each new sound: the squeak of a swing chain, the slap of a tennis ball, the staccato shout of a child calling to a friend. His tail moved in slow, measured sweeps, not excitement, but acknowledgement. Like his handler, he was here to watch, to keep order in quiet ways. Marcus had been walking this route every morning for the past 8 months, a volunteer presence in the park after the city's recreation board invited veterans to help with community safety. He liked the predictability, the same faces, the same benches, the same stands of trees where the squirrels made their half-hearted chases. Valor liked it too, though the dog seemed to take a particular interest in children, slowing whenever a small figure appeared in his peripheral vision. As they rounded the bend near the central playground, Valor's pace changed. His ears locked forward, his head tilting just enough to signal intent. Marcus followed his gaze and saw the woman with the twins, a trim figure in a camel coat, two little girls in matching pale pink dresses. The girls weren't playing. One, Marcus guessed Chloe from her posture, stood scanning the equipment with interest. The other lingered half a step behind, hands tucked into herself. Valor stopped, sitting neatly at the edge of the path, his tail brushing the gravel. He didn't approach, didn't make a sound. He simply fixed his gaze on the girls, the way he sometimes did with children who seemed withdrawn, as if he were waiting for them to decide what happened next. Claire noticed first, her eyes flicking toward the large dog, then to the man holding the leash. She caught in that glance something she couldn't quite name. Steadiness, maybe, or a kind of focus that wasn't intrusive. Marcus gave a slight nod. Nothing more. She didn't return it, not yet. Chloe stopped walking. Her eyes, bright against her pale hair, met Valor's across the short stretch of grass. She stepped forward slowly, her shoes whispering against the ground. Grace followed reluctantly, her gaze darting between the dog and her mother, as if seeking silent permission. Claire didn't speak, didn't pull them back. Marcus kept still, one hand light on the leash. He knew Valor's posture, the gentle forward lean, the steady eyes was his way of offering an introduction without crossing a line. Years ago, on a fractured street in Helmand province, Valor had approached a frightened child in just that way, and the boy had let himself be led to safety. Marcus often wondered if the dog remembered, or if it was simply part of his nature. The girl stopped a few feet away. Chloe's hands were loose at her sides, her chin slightly lifted. Grace's shoulders curved inward, her fingers tightening on the edge of her dress. Valor's tail swished once, twice, then stilled. Marcus waited, letting the moment stretch. He wasn't here to force anything, least of all with children who carried visible weight in their small frames. He felt his phone buzz in his jacket pocket but ignored it. He knew the likely sender, the local veterans group reminding him about next weekend's charity event for children with disabilities. He'd read the invite 3 times and never replied. The idea of standing in a noisy hall with 100 strangers made his pulse climb in ways he couldn't control. Parks were different. Parks were open sky and space to move. Claire's gaze shifted between her daughters and the man with the dog. She saw Chloe's feet angle forward, the slight lean toward Valor, and Grace's eyes tracking the animal, even as she tried to look away. There was something in the way the dog sat patient, unblinking, that seemed to draw the girls in. Claire's instincts told her to intervene, to keep the moment under her control. But something deeper, something softer, told her to wait. The air between the 4 of them felt suspended, like a breath held too long. A pair of boys ran past, chasing a soccer ball, their laughter ringing out. Grace flinched, a tiny, involuntary step back. Valor's ears flicked, his body angling ever so slightly toward her in a subtle protective arc. Marcus caught the movement, saw the way Grace noticed, and the tiniest crease eased from her brow. The first real connection, Claire thought, might have just happened in that silent exchange. She folded her arms loosely, keeping her face neutral, but her mind was alive with questions. Who this man was, why his dog was here, how it was possible that in less than a minute, her daughters were standing this close to a stranger without retreating into their shell. Marcus didn't speak yet. He'd learned that sometimes the most important introductions were made without words. Marcus stayed where he was for a few seconds, watching the pale pink skirt sway gently in the autumn breeze as Chloe and Grace edged closer. The crunch of small shoes on gravel was soft but certain from Chloe, hesitant and uneven from Grace. He felt Valor's leash grow slack in his hand, an instinctive signal from the dog that he was asking permission to move forward. Marcus crouched slowly, easing down until his knees creaked in protest. The adjustment brought him eye level with the twins, and from here he could see them more clearly. Chloe's eyes were a lighter shade of blue than her sister's, curious and bright, scanning the dog from ears to paws. Grace's gaze was harder to catch. It darted away whenever Marcus looked directly at her, as though meeting his eyes might cost something she couldn't spare. Both girls had delicate, heart-shaped faces framed by fine blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends, strands lifting in the breeze. Valor lowered his head and stepped forward at a measured pace, each movement deliberate. His nose twitched as he took in their scent, ears flicking back momentarily, a canine nod of respect before he closed the distance. Without prompting from Marcus, the shepherd eased closer to Grace and, with the gentlest motion, rested the weight of his head on her small knees. Grace froze. Her fingers clenched against the hem of her dress, loosened one by one. Her eyes dropped to the dog's dark muzzle, to the warm, steady gaze that met her without pressure. Marcus could see the moment the tension in her shoulders softened, like a knot untangling in slow motion. Chloe was the first to move. She stepped nearer and reached out a cautious hand, brushing her fingers along Valor's neck where the fur thickened into a soft ruff. "It's like a blanket," she murmured to her sister, her voice barely audible. Grace's lips parted, and then, so softly Marcus thought he'd imagined it, she whispered, "He's warm." The sound was fragile, a note held too long in silence, finally breaking free. Claire's breath caught behind them. She had heard it too. Marcus let a small smile curl at the corner of his mouth. "Valor only listens to brave girls," he said gently. His voice was pitched low, more like a secret than a statement. "Want to know why?" Grace blinked and looked up, just enough to meet his eyes. "Why?" The single word was like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of surprise spreading through Claire's chest. 3 years of silence in front of strangers, broken here, in the middle of an ordinary park. Before Marcus could answer, the thud of running feet approached from behind. A group of kids, 5 or 6 of them, maybe 8 or 9 years old, raced past in a blur of bright jackets, chasing a ball that skittered across the path. Grace flinched hard, her body folding in on itself. Valor reacted instantly. Without a sound, he shifted his weight and stepped sideways, placing his body squarely between Grace and the rushing children. His stance was calm but unmistakable protective, anchoring her in place while her eyes darted after the noise. Chloe moved closer to her sister, resting a hand on her arm. Claire saw it all, every detail of the shepherd's intervention. Her throat tightened. It wasn't just training, that was instinct, a bond between protector and protected, forged in something deeper than obedience. She glanced at Marcus and he was already looking back at her. His expression said he understood what it meant for a child to feel safe in the shadow of another being, even for a moment. A voice carried from a nearby bench, breaking the quiet tension. An older man sat there, wrapped in a worn green parka, a paper cup cradled in both hands. His hair was silver, his cheeks weathered, and there was a faint military bearing to his posture. This was Hank Dorsey, 72, a Vietnam veteran and one of the regulars at the park. He lifted his cup in greeting toward Marcus. Marcus nodded back but didn't rise. Hank had been one of the first people Marcus met when he moved to Asheville, a man who spoke in slow, considered sentences, and who'd once told him, "The world doesn't need more noise, son. It needs more listening." The advice had stuck, shaping the way Marcus approached moments like this one. Valor, satisfied that the small stampede was over, eased back just enough to let Grace see the open space in front of her. She didn't retreat this time. Instead, her hand came up, hesitant, almost trembling, and she rested it on the back of Valor's neck beside Chloe's. Marcus kept his voice low, as if the three of them were conspirators in a game. "You know why Valor only listens to the brave? Because brave kids don't need to be loud. They just speak when it matters." Chloe's brow furrowed, as though considering the rule of some ancient club. Grace's mouth twitched into the faintest suggestion of a smile. From the bench, Claire resisted the urge to step in. Every instinct she had as a mother wanted to wrap her daughters back into the safety of her presence. But she could see something was unfolding here, something delicate that would shatter if handled too roughly. Marcus let the silence linger just long enough to settle. Then, with an almost imperceptible tug on the leash, he brought Valor to sit at his side again. "You two look like you know how to find the best spots in this park," he said lightly. "Ever tried the little slide behind the sandbox? It's faster than the big one." Chloe's eyes flicked toward Grace, a silent question passing between them. Grace's gaze traveled back to the shepherd, then to Marcus. No words came, but the decision was written in the way they both stepped forward, tentative but together. Marcus rose slowly, his leg tightening briefly before he steadied his weight. He gestured toward the path, letting them choose the pace. Valor matched the girls' small strides exactly, his head level with their shoulders, tail swaying in a quiet rhythm. As they rounded the bend toward the sandbox, Marcus glanced back. Claire was still seated, hands clasped in her lap, her expression caught between wonder and disbelief. He gave her the smallest nod, a silent promise that nothing here would be forced. She nodded back, her gray eyes fixed on her daughters as though afraid they might vanish if she looked away. They disappeared behind the sandbox for only a few minutes, the soft sound of giggles, Real, unguarded giggles, trailing back toward the bench. Claire's hands tightened over her knees. It was such a small thing, and yet it felt like the first rung of a ladder she hadn't dared hope still existed. When the trio returned, Valor's tongue lolled in contentment, and Chloe's cheeks were flushed. Grace's dress hem was dusted with sand, and her small, crooked was still there. Marcus slowed them to a stop in front of Claire. "She's braver than she thinks," he said quietly, glancing toward Grace. Claire swallowed, her voice locked somewhere between her heart and her throat. The smell of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries drifted out onto the sidewalk as Claire pushed open the glass door of the small cafe on Main Street. The bell above the door gave a delicate chime, and the quiet hum of conversation inside fell into a comfortable lull. This was one of Asheville's older establishments, the kind of place where the wood floors carried decades of polish, and the walls were lined with black and white photographs of the town before the tourists came. Marcus stepped in behind her, his frame filling the doorway for a moment before he eased to one side, letting Valor enter first. The German Shepherd's nails clicked lightly on the hardwood as he scanned the room, ears swiveling with quiet efficiency. His gaze passed over each table, assessing without tension, before settling back into calm. Claire noticed how he walked not in front or behind, but precisely beside Marcus, moving as if tethered by something deeper than a leash. Chloe and Grace followed close to their mother, pale pink dresses brushing the tops of their tights as they stepped inside. Their cheeks still held a faint flush from the playground, and the air between them buzzed with that quiet excitement only children can hold after a new experience. Chloe's eyes darted toward the glass display of muffins and croissants, while Grace kept close to Valor, her small hand brushing his side now and then, as though to confirm he was still there. A young waitress named Lila, barely 20, with a ponytail of dark auburn hair and freckles splashed across her nose, greeted them with a bright smile. She wore a faded green apron over a white shirt and jeans, and there was an unstudied warmth to her tone that made the welcome feel genuine. Lila had grown up in Asheville and spent summers volunteering at a local youth center. She had a knack for sensing the mood of children and adjusting her approach accordingly. Claire chose a booth near the back, where the lighting was softer and the noise of the espresso machine dulled to a background hum. The twins slid in on one side with Valor lying beside them on the floor, his body angled so his head rested under the table between them. Marcus took the seat opposite, his posture relaxed but with the quiet alertness of someone who always kept an eye on entrances and exits. The girls began to giggle as Marcus gave Valor a quiet series of commands. "Shake," he murmured, and Valor lifted one large paw to Chloe's small palm. "Down" came next, and the shepherd folded neatly to the floor, tail sweeping in contentment. Grace's laughter came softer, but it was there, an unguarded sound that made Claire's chest ache in a way she couldn't name. Once drinks were ordered, hot chocolate for the twins, black coffee for Marcus, and a cappuccino for Claire. Marcus rested his forearms on the table. Claire's gaze flicked to the faint white scar running along the back of his right hand, disappearing under his sleeve. She had noticed the slight limp when he walked too, and now curiosity pressed against her caution. He caught her glance and gave a small, knowing smile. "You're wondering about the leg," he said. His voice carried no bitterness, just a quiet matter-of-factness. Claire hesitated but nodded. "2 tours in Afghanistan," Marcus began, eyes momentarily focused somewhere far beyond the cafe. "Last one was rougher. I was with a medevac unit convoy duty, shuttling supplies and pulling our guys out when things went bad." He paused, fingers idly tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "We hit an IED on a supply run. My seat took most of the blast. Valor was with me. He took shrapnel in his flank, but stayed by me until we were pulled out." As if sensing the mention, Valor lifted his head briefly from beneath the table, dark eyes steady on Marcus, before settling again. "I lost a friend that day," Marcus continued, voice low. "Couldn't stand the noise after that. Crowds, sirens, even a TV left on too loud felt like it was pressing down on me." He took a sip of his coffee, the steam curling around his face. "So I moved here. Smaller city, more sky. The park work, it helps. Gives me a reason to get up, and sometimes I get to help kids feel safe again. That's enough." Before Claire could respond, a small commotion came from a table 2 booths over. A boy of about 5, sandy-haired and round-cheeked, sat in a booster seat, his lower lip trembling before he let out a sudden, wailing cry. His mother, a woman in her early 30s with tired eyes and a cardigan, slipping off one shoulder leaned in, whispering and trying to soothe him. The boy shook his head, tears running down flushed cheeks. Valor was on his feet before Marcus gave any command. The shepherd moved with calm purpose, pausing at the edge of the booth as if asking permission. The boy's tearful gaze caught on the dog's steady presence. Valor eased down onto his belly, stretching his neck forward just enough to let the boy see him clearly. Within seconds, the boy's sobs faltered into hiccups. He reached a tentative hand toward the shepherd, brushing fingers against the thick fur between Valor's ears. Marcus watched quietly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes warm. Claire, observing from her seat, felt a ripple of realization. This wasn't just training. This was instinct, woven into both man and dog, a shared language of calm that neither seemed to think twice about using. The boy's mother mouthed a silent thank you toward Marcus. He gave a nod and recalled Valor with a soft whistle. The shepherd returned, tail making a slow arc, and resumed his spot beside the twins, who now looked at him with something close to awe. Claire sipped her cappuccino, the taste suddenly richer for reasons that had nothing to do with coffee. She had come here today to understand how this man had reached her daughter so easily, but she was beginning to realize the answer wasn't something that could be taught in therapy rooms or found in case studies. It lived in the small, unremarkable moments. A paw offered, a barrier created in the path of running children, a silent presence beside a crying boy. Marcus caught her watching again and tilted his head slightly. "You're thinking something," he said. "I'm thinking," Claire replied slowly, "that you make it look easy." "It's not," Marcus said simply. "It just matters enough to keep trying." The next morning the park felt sharper, the air cooler, carrying the promise of winter on its edge. The trees that had been aflame with gold and russet only a week ago now showed gaps in their canopies, letting streaks of pale light slant across the damp grass. Claire walked the familiar path with Chloe and Grace, their pale pink dresses peeking from beneath soft wool coats. The girls' steps were quick today, almost eager, and Claire caught herself smiling at their unspoken anticipation. They rounded the bend, and there he was, Marcus, standing in a patch of open grass, his weight balanced on his good leg as he flicked a bright red frisbee into the air. Valor bounded after it, muscles rippling under his black and tan coat, catching the disc mid-leap before landing with a graceful pivot. His tail swept once before he trotted back, delivering the toy neatly into Marcus's waiting hand. "Valor!" The twins' voices rang out together, clear and confident. The sound carried across the park, startling Claire for just a moment. It was so different from the tentative murmurs she'd grown used to. Marcus turned at the call, and Valor's ears shot forward, his entire body changing from focused athlete to exuberant friend. The shepherd ran to meet them, slowing just before reaching the girls and pressed his head gently against Grace's side while Chloe reached for his collar. Marcus followed at a more measured pace, his smile quiet but unmistakable. Claire waited until the first rush of reunion had settled, then stepped closer. "Marcus," she began, her tone steady, "I've been thinking about something since yesterday." He glanced up from unclipping the frisbee's fabric cover to check it for tears. "Yeah? I run a company that designs adaptive communication devices," she said. "We work with children who have speech impairments, autism, trauma kids who need more than just technology. We can't teach what you do, not in any manual or training module. I want you to work with my team. Show them what it looks like to reach someone from here." She touched her chest. "Not just from here." She tapped her temple. Marcus's hands stilled on the frisbee. His gaze dropped, and the line between his brows deepened. "Claire, I'm not a specialist. I don't have certifications, degrees. I'm just a guy who walks his dog in the park. You're the guy who, in 2 days, got my daughters to speak to a stranger after 3 years of silence," Claire replied, her voice quiet but firm. "That's more than any of our experts have managed." He shifted his weight, his limp more noticeable as he turned slightly away. "What if I can't do it again? What if it was just luck?" Valor, sensing the change in tone, stepped closer to Marcus and pressed his nose into the man's palm. Marcus's fingers curled instinctively around the dog's muzzle, and something eased in his shoulders. He gave a faint huff of breath, almost a laugh. You really think I could help? I don't think, Claire said. I know. For a moment, the only sound was the distant chatter of children on the swings. Then Marcus gave a slow nod. All right, but if I'm doing this, it's not charity. I want to earn my place. Good, Claire said with the faintest smile, because I don't hire anyone for charity. Before either could say more, a sharp cry split the air. On the far side of the playground, a little girl in a purple coat had toppled from the swing, landing hard on her side. Her mother was still crossing the path toward her, too far to reach in time. Marcus didn't hesitate. He strode across the grass, his limp no hindrance now, with Valor moving in sync at his side. Reaching the girl, Marcus crouched low, speaking softly while checking her arm for injury. The shepherd stood just behind, head lowered, tail still, forming a living wall between the child and the curious onlookers who had begun to gather. The girl's sobs quieted under Marcus's calm instructions. Can you wiggle your fingers for me? Good. Now try moving your toes. Her mother arrived, breathless, and Marcus reassured her that it was only a bruise. Valor stepped aside, allowing the woman to gather her daughter into her arms. Claire had followed at a slower pace, the twins at her side. She watched the scene unfold with the clear certainty that her decision was right. It wasn't just that Marcus had skill, he carried an instinct for safety and dignity that no amount of corporate training could replicate. By the time they returned to the open lawn, the girls had picked up the frisbee. Chloe tossed it clumsily and Valor chased it down with unfeigned joy. Grace's throw was even smaller, the disc wobbling only a few feet, but Valor pounced on it as though it had been launched halfway across the field. Marcus looked at Claire over the space between them. When do we start? The morning sunlight in downtown Asheville came in crisp and clear, spilling across the red brick facades and glass windows of the Whitmore Adaptive Technologies building. The structure was a mix of modern lines and historic preservation, a three-story space where the smell of polished wood still lingered from its warehouse days. It was Marcus's first day on the job, though the term job felt strange to him after years of moving between short-term gigs and volunteer work. Valor patted at his side, ears perked, tail sweeping in slow arcs as they approached the glass doors. Inside, the reception area opened into a wide lobby filled with light from tall windows. A receptionist in her mid-30s named Dana, with a warm smile and short natural curls, looked up from her desk. She wore a soft teal blouse, and her voice carried the unhurried cadence of someone who had grown up in the Carolina foothills. You must be Marcus, and this must be the famous Valor. Dana leaned slightly forward, extending her hand for Marcus, and lowering it to offer the back for Valor to sniff. The shepherd accepted the greeting with dignified calm, earning an audible "oh" from two interns standing nearby. It took less than an hour for word to spread through the office. By mid-morning, employees from different departments had found polite reasons to pass through the common space where Marcus and Valor were being introduced. He shook hands, learned names: Jared from product design, Elena from marketing, Marisol from pediatric outreach, and quietly watched as Valor navigated each new person without hesitation. The dog seemed to read body language as easily as breathing, adjusting his posture for shy employees, leaning in for those who crouched to greet him, and standing sentinel when the hallway grew busy. In a glass-walled conference room, Claire was speaking with her operations manager, a wiry man in his late 40s named Victor Chang. Victor was second-generation Chinese-American, with the sharp, assessing eyes of someone who measured everything in terms of efficiency, but who had a dry, understated humor. He had been skeptical when Claire first proposed bringing Marcus onto the team. No formal certifications, no clinical background, but now, watching the natural ease between Valor and the staff, his expression softened. Late in the morning, the elevator doors opened and Chloe and Grace stepped out, their pale pink dresses topped with cream cardigans, escorted by Claire's assistant, Hannah. Both girls carried small tote bags decorated with hand-drawn paw prints. The moment Valor spotted them, his tail wagged in broad sweeps, and the girls crossed the lobby at a near run. This is Valor, Chloe announced to a group of curious employees who had gathered nearby, as though they'd never met him before. He can catch a frisbee, shake hands, and he's braver than anyone. Waka Grace stood beside her, nodding, and added, "And he's warm." A remark that made Marcus glance up, his eyes crinkling with quiet recognition. The twins took turns showing Valor's tricks to anyone who asked, their voices carrying with a confidence that only days ago seemed impossible. During lunch, a woman from the accounting department approached Marcus while the girls were sitting in a corner with Valor. Her name was Susan Miller, mid-30s, light brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore simple glasses and had the slightly rushed air of a single parent. She hesitated before speaking. "I just wanted to say, my son is 7. He's shy, barely talks outside of our house. I brought him by the office picnic last year, and he hid behind me the whole time. I watched him sit with Valor just now, and after 5 minutes, he started telling the dog about his favorite dinosaurs. He's never done that with anyone outside the family." Marcus listened without interruption, the corners of his mouth turning upward. "Valor's good at listening," he said simply. Susan's voice caught a little as she thanked him, and she walked away with the kind of relieved smile only a parent who has just witnessed a breakthrough can have. Claire, who had been standing near enough to overhear, caught Marcus's eye and nodded once in quiet affirmation. The rest of the afternoon passed in a steady rhythm. Marcus observed the therapy equipment prototypes, sat in on a brief with the pediatric outreach team, and made notes on how Valor could be integrated into certain client sessions. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was with the measured precision of someone who valued the weight of every word. By the time the clock edged toward 4, the sky outside had taken on the warmer tones of late afternoon. Claire suggested they all walk to the park for a break. The group that set out was smaller now, just Marcus, Valor, Claire, and the twins. The air smelled faintly of fallen leaves and wood smoke from a nearby cafe chimney. In the park, they found the open lawn where Chloe and Grace had first met Valor. The girls tossed the frisbee, each throw longer and more confident than the last, while Valor leapt and caught it with the same joy as before. Marcus joined in, laughing when Chloe's throw curved wildly and nearly landed in a bush. Grace clapped her hands when Valor trotted back with it, her cheeks flushed from the chill and the running. Claire stood a few steps away, arms folded, watching the scene. The last rays of sunlight lit the edges of Marcus's profile as he turned toward her. "You know," he said, his voice low but clear over the distance, "I think we're all finding our voices again." His gaze drifted to the twins, then to Valor, whose ears were tipped forward as if he understood. Claire felt her own smile spread, slow and unforced. "Yes," she said, "I think we are." The frisbee arced through the air again, and for a moment it felt as though the park, the company, and the long shadows of their past lives had folded into this single, quiet piece of time one worth holding on to. Sometimes the smallest moments can open the biggest doors. A single word, a shared laugh, or the touch of a loyal friend can change everything. Marcus and Valor reminded us that healing is not always about fixing what is broken, but about finding the courage to trust again. If you believe every voice matters and that kindness can lead someone back to theirs, share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touches you, give it a like and follow our channel for more stories that warm the heart and inspire hope.